She's inspired millions with her messages of faith, hope, and prosperity. But behind the polished sermons and best-selling books, shocking accusations are now coming to light. Joyce Meyer, one of the most well-known figures in modern Christianity, is facing claims of fraud and deception that could change everything. What if the truth isn't what you've been told? What really goes on behind the scenes of her ministry? Stay tuned. The answers may leave you speechless. Before the private jets, the packed arenas, and the best-selling books, Joyce Meyer was just a woman trying to survive. Her story didn't begin with fame or fortune. It started with pain. Joyce often spoke openly about the trauma she endured in her early life. She was sexually abused by her father for years, something she didn't talk about until much later in life. That kind of pain leaves deep scars, and for a long time, she carried those scars in silence. But somewhere in the middle of that darkness, Joyce found faith. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't easy. She went through a long process of healing, learning to trust again, learning to forgive, and learning to believe that her past didn't define her future. She leaned into the Bible, into prayer, and into the belief that God could use even the most broken people for something good. That belief changed her life. Joyce started teaching small Bible studies in her local church. Nothing fancy, just folding chairs, Bibles, and her voice. But people listened, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She didn't preach from a distance. She talked about her struggles, her anger, her trauma, all the messy parts of life that most people keep hidden, and people connected with that. They saw themselves in her story. Word spread, and soon those small groups turned into bigger gatherings. Then came the tapes, the radio shows, and eventually TV broadcasts. Joyce Meyer Ministries grew fast, faster than anyone could have imagined. What started as a local outreach became a global operation. She published dozens of books, many of them landing on bestseller lists. She began speaking in massive stadiums, drawing crowds in the tens of thousands. Her message of healing, hope, and personal empowerment struck a chord, especially with women who had been through similar pain. Joyce became more than just a preacher. She became a brand. With her bold voice, sharp delivery, and unfiltered honesty, she built an empire. Her face was on book covers, her name on conference banners, her voice on Christian networks worldwide. She was respected, even admired for her transparency and her message that anyone, no matter how broken, could be restored. But with rapid success came attention, and with attention came questions. Questions about the money, the message, and the ministry behind the scenes. Questions that would eventually lead to serious accusations. But before all of that, there was Joyce. A woman with a painful past who turned her story into a platform, and her suffering into a stage. Whether you love her or question her, there's no denying that her rise was powerful and very real. When people think of preachers, especially those who talk about humility, faith, and living simply, they often imagine someone modest, someone who puts the needs of others before their own. And for years, that's exactly how Joyce Meyer sounded. Her sermons focused on overcoming pain, trusting God, and letting go of material attachments. She spoke about emotional healing, spiritual strength, and finding peace without needing the things of this world. But behind the message of simplicity and surrender, another image started to appear, one that didn't quite match the words being preached. Because while Joyce Meyer was encouraging millions to let go of material distractions, she herself was living a life that looked anything but simple. It started with small whispers, stories about designer clothes, expensive furniture, and luxury homes. Then, over time, those whispers turned into headlines. Investigative reports began revealing just how wealthy Joyce Meyer Ministries had become, and how much of that wealth was tied directly to Joyce and her inner circle. In the early 2000s, one of the first big stories broke when it was reported that the ministry had spent millions on personal luxuries. We're not talking about basic housing or travel. We're talking about a $23,000 0-cents marble-topped commode, a $30,000 0-cents conference table, several multi-million-dollar homes. Not for the ministry, but for Joyce and her family. According to the reports, these properties weren't just comfortable, they were massive and lavish. One of them had a 5-car garage, a pool house, and even an elevator. These weren't average ministry expenses. These were signs of a lifestyle most of her followers could only dream of. Then came the private jet. Not just chartered flights, a full-on Gulfstream jet owned by the ministry, used by Joyce for travel. When asked why she needed such luxury, the explanation was that it helped her keep up with the demands of the ministry, traveling across the country and around the world to preach the gospel. Maybe that's true, but still, the contrast between her preaching and her lifestyle became harder and harder to ignore. It wasn't just about the money, it was the message. Because while Joyce was living in mansions, flying private, and wearing designer clothing, she continued to tell her audience that God didn't want them to chase after worldly things. She preached that happiness and peace came from within, not from what you own. She told people to let go of greed, pride, and the desire for material wealth. And yet, she appeared to be surrounded by everything she said didn't matter. That disconnect started to bother people. Not just critics, but some of her own supporters. They began to wonder, if she's preaching about simplicity and trust in God, why does her life look like something out of a luxury magazine? Why is the ministry spending so much on things that seem to serve comfort, not the message? In 2007, these questions became loud enough to trigger a U.S. Senate investigation. Senator Chuck Grassley launched a probe into 6 major televangelists, including Joyce Meyer, to find out whether they were using tax-exempt donations to fund lavish lifestyles. The investigation wasn't about theology, it was about transparency. Were donations being used for ministry work or personal luxury? To her credit, Joyce Meyer was one of the few who cooperated with the investigation. She released some financial details and promised to make changes in how the ministry operated. She even announced that her salary would no longer come from donations, but from book royalties and personal business. It was a move meant to show good faith. But for many, the damage was already done, because by then the image was clear. Joyce Meyer, the woman who spoke so powerfully about letting go of earthly things, was living in a way that looked a lot like the very culture of materialism she warned against. Her defenders argue that she never claimed poverty was holy, and in fact, Joyce often said she believed God wanted his people to live well. She preached the prosperity gospel in her own way, saying that faith could bring blessings and that believers shouldn't feel guilty for enjoying life. And for some, that message brought hope. It told them they didn't have to be poor or suffer to prove their faith. But others saw it differently. They saw a woman who used faith as a platform to build personal wealth. They saw a ministry that preached healing and hope while quietly collecting millions in donations from people who sometimes gave their last dollars out of desperation. People who believed that if they just gave enough, prayed enough, and believed enough, God would bless them like he had blessed Joyce. And that's the heart of the controversy, the gap between message and reality. There's nothing illegal about success. There's nothing wrong with being financially blessed. But when spiritual leaders ask others to sacrifice while they live in luxury, people start asking hard questions. When the preacher talks about letting go of pride while wearing a $10,000 0-cents outfit, people notice. And when the person on stage tells others to trust God with their finances while sitting on a throne-like chair in a mansion paid for by donations, the trust starts to crack. Joyce Meyer has said publicly that she never tried to hide her lifestyle. She's defended it, saying that she worked hard, wrote books, built a ministry, and was simply enjoying the rewards. That might be true, but the question many ask isn't whether she earned it, it's whether she should have taken it, because the people who gave to Joyce Meyer Ministries weren't millionaires. Many were working-class families, people struggling with debt, people going through divorces, job loss, depression, people who gave because they believed in the message. They gave out of hope, and when they saw that money funding luxury cars and high-end homes, it felt like betrayal. In the end, the issue wasn't just how she lived. It was how that lifestyle clashed with the image of humility she had built over years. Joyce Meyer taught people to live differently, to rise above the culture of greed, to trust in God, not money. But over time, it started to look like she had done the opposite, and while some still defend her, saying her success proves God's favor, others walked away, feeling like they had been fooled. Because when the sermon ends and the lights go out, people don't just remember the words. They remember how those words match the life behind them. For Joyce Meyer, the lavish lifestyle became a shadow that followed her ministry. No matter how powerful her message was, people couldn't unsee the mansions, the jet, the luxury. And for many, that raised one final, painful question. Was the message real, or just part of the brand? Over the years, Joyce Meyer became one of the most well-known names in Christian ministry. Her voice, her books, her TV broadcasts, they reached millions of people around the world. For many, she was a source of comfort and hope, someone who helped them believe that no matter how broken their past was, they could heal through faith. But at the same time, as her platform grew, so did the criticism. And at the center of much of that criticism were serious accusations, claims of financial misuse and manipulation that caused many to question everything they thought they knew about her ministry. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just murmurs. People started asking questions about where the money was going. Joyce Meyer Ministries had grown into a huge organization, taking in millions of dollars every year in donations. Supporters believed they were giving to help spread the gospel, to support missions, or to fund charitable work. But when people started digging into how the ministry operated financially, the story that emerged didn't sit right with everyone. Some former employees and watchdog groups raised red flags. They claimed that the ministry wasn't just using donations for spreading the word of God, it was also being used to fund a lavish lifestyle for Joyce, her family, and a close group of insiders. Critics pointed to the expensive homes, high-end furnishings, luxury cars, and even things like a private jet, all linked to ministry funds. These weren't rumors without receipts. There were documents, financial statements, and property records that supported many of these claims. In one case, an investigation revealed that Joyce Meyer Ministries had purchased several homes in a gated community, not just for ministry use, but for Joyce and her family members. These weren't ordinary homes. They were large, high-end properties worth millions. Critics argued that this kind of spending was completely out of line with what donors expected their money to be used for. One of the most infamous examples came when it was reported that the ministry had bought a $30,000 zero-cents marble-topped commode, not a toilet but a cabinet, used to store Joyce's makeup. It became a symbol of what many saw as the over-the-top spending habits of a ministry that preached about humility and trusting God over material wealth. Whether or not that one piece of furniture told the full story, it certainly got people's attention. Then came the big one, the Senate investigation. In 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa launched a financial inquiry into 6 major televangelists, including Joyce Meyer. The purpose was simple: to find out whether these ministries were misusing their tax-exempt status and collecting massive wealth without proper accountability. Joyce Meyer Ministries was asked to hand over detailed financial records. Unlike some others who refused, Joyce actually did comply. She submitted records, opened her books, and defended the way the ministry was run. That cooperation earned her some praise, but it didn't erase the concerns. The investigation revealed just how much money the ministry had and how much of it was going toward personal benefits for Joyce and her family. Even though her team argued that everything was within legal and ethical guidelines, the sheer scale of the spending raised eyebrows. How could a ministry that asked for donations from everyday people, some of them poor, struggling, and desperate, justify spending tens of thousands on furniture or paying for luxury travel? The bigger question wasn't just about where the money went. It was about how people were being encouraged to give in the first place. Joyce Meyer, like many prosperity preachers, often tied giving to blessing. In sermons and fundraising materials, the message was clear: if you sow into the ministry, God will bless you. The more you give, the more you'll be rewarded. Maybe not always with money, but with breakthrough, healing, or promotion. For some, that message felt manipulative. It created a cycle where people who were already struggling financially felt pressure to give beyond their means, believing that if they just gave a little more, God would answer their prayers. There were stories of people giving their last few dollars, maxing out credit cards, or writing checks they couldn't afford, all because they believed in the message. Some said they gave joyfully. Others, in hindsight, said they felt used. They thought they were giving to God, but later realized they were helping fund a ministry leader's private estate or personal comforts. Critics labeled it spiritual manipulation, using faith, fear, and promises of blessings to convince people to give. And while Joyce Meyer never directly said, "Give me money and you'll be rich," the way the message was packaged left many with that impression. It was subtle, it was emotional, and it worked. The ministry has always defended itself, saying donations are used for spreading the gospel, producing content, supporting missions, and running outreach programs. And to be fair, Joyce Meyer Ministries has done charitable work, disaster relief, prison outreach, and helping the poor in different countries. But the controversy isn't about whether they've done good things. It's about whether those good things justify the amount of wealth being taken in and the way that wealth is distributed internally. Some former insiders claimed that Joyce's family held high-paying roles within the ministry, roles that weren't always clearly defined. Nepotism, high salaries, and generous perks for family members all contributed to the belief that this wasn't just a ministry. It was a family-run empire, funded by donations. Even after the Senate inquiry closed without any formal punishment, the concerns didn't go away. The public memory held onto those headlines: jets, mansions, luxury furniture, and million-dollar salaries. And for many people, it left a bitter taste. How could someone who talked about brokenness and surrender be living in such comfort, funded by the giving of people who trusted her? In response to the backlash, Joyce made changes. She said her salary would no longer come from ministry donations, but from her book royalties. She tried to be more transparent about her income. Some of her supporters accepted that and continued to follow her teaching. Others walked away, feeling disillusioned and betrayed. In the end, the accusations of financial misuse and manipulation weren't just about money. They were about trust. Trust between a leader and her followers. Trust between a message and the life behind it. And once that trust started to crack, it became hard for some to hear her words the same way again. Joyce Meyer rose to fame by telling people that God could heal them, help them, and restore their lives. And maybe He did. But when the money behind that message started looking more like a business than a ministry, the world started asking questions. Questions that still don't have easy answers. The moment the headlines started rolling in about Joyce Meyer's wealth, her luxury homes, and the Senate investigation, people began reacting. And they weren't quiet about it. For years, Joyce had been a trusted voice in Christian homes. Her books were on shelves, her sermons were playing on TVs, radios, and phones all over the world. She was seen as a woman of faith, a survivor, and a straight shooter. But when the public got a glimpse of the lifestyle behind the pulpit, everything changed. Some people were shocked, others were angry, and a lot of folks felt confused. How could someone who preached about trusting God and living humbly be surrounded by luxury cars, private jets, and million-dollar mansions? Was it all just an act? Had they been giving their hard-earned money to help spread the word of God, or to help someone else live like a celebrity? Online forums exploded. Social media users began digging deeper into financial reports and ministry statements. Videos and blogs popped up with titles like "The Truth About Joyce Meyer" or "Is Joyce Meyer using your donations to fund her lifestyle?" People were asking questions, not just skeptics, but longtime followers too. They wanted to believe in her. But now there were doubts they couldn't ignore. There were also testimonies from people who had given to the ministry for years. Some said they didn't regret it. They believed their giving was between them and God. But others admitted they felt manipulated. They shared stories of giving money they didn't really have because they were promised breakthrough, healing, or financial blessing. And when those blessings didn't come, they were left feeling hurt, ashamed, or even spiritually betrayed. The press picked up on all of it. News outlets ran stories on the prosperity gospel and how preachers like Joyce Meyer were getting rich while preaching about spiritual wealth. Her ministry was being held up as an example of what critics said was wrong with modern televangelism. Too much show, too little accountability. Amid all the noise, people waited to hear what Joyce Meyer would say. Would she ignore it? Defend herself? Apologize? At first, Joyce didn't say much publicly. She stayed quiet while the Senate investigation unfolded. But when the pressure grew, she finally spoke. Joyce said she had nothing to hide. She explained that the ministry's finances were legal and transparent. She said she never tried to mislead anyone and that her income was earned fairly, through book sales, conference appearances, and years of hard work. She emphasized that she didn't live off donations anymore and that she had made changes to avoid even the appearance of wrongdoing. She even took the step of releasing financial statements, showing what she made and how the ministry operated. It was a bold move, one not many other televangelists at the time were willing to make. In fact, of the 6 ministries investigated by Senator Grassley, Joyce Meyer was one of the only ones who fully cooperated. To some people, that said a lot. They saw her willingness to open the books as a sign of integrity. They believed she had nothing to hide and appreciated that she was trying to be transparent. To those loyal followers, the criticism felt unfair, an attack on a woman who had helped millions. But for others, it wasn't enough. They believed the damage had already been done. Transparency didn't change the fact that millions in donations had helped fund a lifestyle far from the humble image her sermons promoted. And no amount of financial openness could erase the feeling that they'd been misled. Some people walked away completely. They stopped watching her sermons, unsubscribed from her emails, and even returned her books to stores. They felt disillusioned, like they had trusted someone who didn't live the message she preached. Others didn't walk away entirely, but started watching with more caution, more skepticism. Still, Joyce Meyer continued preaching. She didn't stop writing, didn't stop speaking, and didn't retreat from the spotlight. If anything, she became more direct about the issue. In later interviews, she acknowledged that things could have been handled differently. She admitted that she had made mistakes, especially in how she communicated about money and blessings. In one particularly honest moment, she said that she no longer agreed with everything she had preached about prosperity in the past. She said she had learned and grown. For many, that moment was important. It showed humility. It showed growth. It showed that she wasn't above admitting when she was wrong. Some followers said it made them respect her even more. Others were still skeptical, wondering if it was genuine or just a way to control the damage. Regardless of which side people were on, the controversy changed how Joyce Meyer was seen. Before, she was mostly known as a faith teacher and survivor with a strong message. After the accusations and investigation, she became a symbol of something bigger: the debate over prosperity preaching, church finances, and the blurred lines between ministry and business.